Now, we started a month ago talking about the history of black economic empowerment and of the various scorecards under the new codes of good practice. But tonight we're going to discuss the scorecards in a bit more detail. We're going to have a look at the categories and hopefully shed some light on the question of whether it or not it is possible or impossible for an average Joe out there company to score enough points to get a decent BEE rating and certification. On the phone tonight we have Ralph Ertner, CEO of Into Group. Ralph, you picked a good night to stay indoors. It looks absolutely freezing out there. Welcome.
Thank you, Michael. Yeah, I chose this time the option of not, the daring task of mastering the traffic in the rain.
The less said about the way Johannesburg drivers drive at the first sign of rain, the better. In studio, I've got Reinoud, Willemsen, founder and customer relationship manager of the Experience Factory. Although I don't think that's exactly how you call what your business card said. It just says founding partner, Reinoud. So I think we'll call you that. Welcome.
Welcome. Thank you.
And on the line, we've got Pascal Lagesse, who's the MD of SAB&T Verificators. Pascal, thanks for joining us.
Yes, thank you very much.
And I'm going to ask you to kick us off tonight. In our last feature, as I said, we pretty much learned that there are three types of enterprises when it comes to BEE verification. We've got exempt micro enterprises, we've got qualifying small enterprises, and we've got large companies, and those are with over 50 million rand in turnover. Does each of these types of enterprises have its own specific scorecard? Just take me through this.
Yes, it does, Michael. Yeah. So first of all, the first group, as we classify them as EMEs or exempt micro enterprises, they are any enterprise that's turnovers between 0 and 10 million per annum. The second classification are qualifying small enterprises, and those are the companies whose annual turnover is between 10 and 50 million. Then there's what we have called the generics, which are all those companies above 50 million. So in terms of classification, those are the three different classifications. But in terms of scorecard, the QSCs, which we refer to as qualifying small enterprise, and generics, have got a very similar scorecard against which they get measured. EMEs is a little bit easier. I don't know if you want me to explain that now or you want to get into that a bit later.
Well, we will get into the differences a little bit later on in the show, but I think that sets it up quite nicely. Well, when we look at the first category here, which I think is already one of the most problematic, the aspect of ownership, and with that the first out of the three primary elements of the scorecard, which means missing the minimum target of 40% of these targeted scores in this category will in the end inevitably lead to a downgrade of one's BEE rating by a whole level. Now, is there any way around this, or does the company owner have to give away 10% of the shares in his company to a new black shareholder in order to prevent his company from being downgraded? I mean, if I look at the number of companies in South Africa alone who are owned by multinationals, for example, what choice do they have?
There are a few options for them, but inevitably it is about looking at parting with shares in your business. So if you look at multinationals who have possibly got policies in place that they won't, give away any shares or sell any shares of their business, there's something called the Equity Equivalent Program. That's a program whereby the DTI will allow these multinationals to spend money on supplier and enterprise development in lieu of ownership points. So that is one of the options they could possibly look at, that they don't have to actually physically sell any of their ownerships, their shareholding, but they can go through this program that's called equity equivalent.
Ralph?
Yes, Michael?
Yeah, well, I just, when you look at some of those options available, the equity equivalent program that Pascal has mentioned seems quite expensive. I don't know how many have been passed yet. It's still very early days. What do you make of that option?
Not much, because we are addressing the average company and not the big, large foreign corporations like Microsoft, who successfully participated into an equity equivalent program. I believe so far, since its inauguration, there are only six programs that were approved. So therefore, it's not really an option, not really a success for the DTI. There's, however, other ways around it, and I'm not talking about ways around it of quickly opening up a new company and surfing basically on the background of a EME as a new startup and quickly getting a level 4 certificate. But in order to substitute ownership and to reach the sub-minimum target, there's, for example, still allowed the option of forming a trust of which the employees of the companies are the beneficiaries, especially the black employees, and where this trust takes a loan from the company in order to buy shares in that company, and then participates, of course, to a certain extent at the profits at the end of the year, which will then, make the trust the black shareholder. And I think there's a long talk about going on of reducing the recognition of this trust construct, but it has got also, a positive side effect. And when I just say, we have a little bit of a hire and fire society in various, industrial sectors as far as the employees are concerned, but the moment they are participating through such a trust, for example, and receiving, a dividend, at the end of the day after the loan has been paid back, might create a little bit more of loyalty towards the company as well.
We certainly see that sort of shareholder buy-in in the Mittelstand in Germany, for example, where they do have a particular framework for their labour relations that seems to be quite successful. Reinoud, when you look at those options, it's very one has to be very careful here that one sells in line with the spirit of the legislation, because one thing that the DTI has said it'll be clamping down on is fronting.
Yes, indeed. I must put down the disclaimer. I'm not a specialist on the BE scorecards. For me, first of all, I think the BE it's a reality, and I think as a company, you have to look at it from a challenge point of view. And if you look at it and you embrace it and you take your advantages with it, I think you set yourself up for success in the future. Trying to ditch and dodge, or trying to do fronting is a short-term solution, and unless you only want to have real short-term shareholder value, you shouldn't do it. So that's my personal take on things, and that's also how we engage with it. And if you look at it from that perspective, like Pascal says, I would never give away shares. I think that's probably even more defeating the purpose of BEE. I think you should always seek to sell your shares, but for fair value.
Well, if there's no skin in the game, if something was given to you, then it's very difficult to align one's interest, and it becomes self-defeating. So I agree with you on that point. Pascal, following ownership, let's go on to the second category here, because time is fleeting. The second category that used to deal with employment equity and management, it now has been reduced to management control. What does that exactly mean, and how does one get points for managers? And talk to me about management control here.
Okay, basically, Michael, what they've done is they've combined two of the elements from the old codes, which was management control and employment equity, and they've just combined it into one, and they've called it management control. But what they've done is there's about 4 or 5 different categories within management control that one gets measured against. And just to give you some example, one is board participation, and they'd look at voting rights and how many black executives you've got as a percentage of your total executive management. Then they'd look at other executive management, where you possibly have got non-executive managers within your board. Then they'd look at the other levels of senior, middle, and junior management. So in the past, where they only looked, for instance, with the qualifying small enterprises on management control, they just looked at managers, and then under employment equity, they only look at staff. Now you're looking at just management for all the businesses over 10 million turnover. What
about workers found on the shop floor, so to speak? I mean, how relevant is that to the conversation now? No, that wouldn't count anymore, because they just look at management, and the only place where they look at employees are disabled people. So if you have disabled, employees which are labourers or staff, they would count about 2 points out of 19 points. But the rest of it is basically only looking at management. Right. Well, I'm certainly learning a thing or two about the scorecard that I thought even I had pinned down, which just shows you how complex sometimes these areas can be. Now, skills development, Reinoud, is the third category, and a company can score points for skills development, which means if it spends money on company training, for example. But I believe it has become more difficult to collect points here. What's happening in the skills development space?
I don't think it's more difficult. Yeah, if you want to see difficulties, then it's more difficult. But I think it's more interesting. So they've broadened the scope of collecting skills development points. You can get and Pascal can correct me if I'm wrong, but you can collect skills development points outside of your own staff contingent seat. So you can, if you uplift the skills for your suppliers, for instance, but even outside companies, you can still collect your skills development points. Not totally, but to an extent. So that opens up opportunities. At the same time, the amount of money that you have to spend has risen from 3% of your payroll to 6%. So that's a significant increase that you have to spend on to get to your full skills development points.
That was probably the area, and also the fact that one needs to be submitting certain documents to the CETA, which creates just a little bit more bureaucracy, I guess, in the whole process.
That's on the learnerships. On internships, there's less bureaucracy. But learnerships are needed for the majority of graduates that are not coming out of university with matrics and the dropouts. Your internships is a smaller contingency, but the requirements for internships are less bureaucratic and more open for individual fulfillment. Yeah.
Take me through the practicalities of drafting a skills development plan and what the codes sort of prescribe here in terms of what the DTI and the various bodies need to see.
We have a solution as the Experience Factory, which, as an outside provider, will take them through a whole set of soft skills. So we believe that university graduates for internships have, we look at talent in a different way. So we want to embrace them in a much broader perspective, in a much broader concept, and take them through a whole set of soft skills that would allow them to be successful in the corporate world. But it basically comes down to, for a successful internship, because that's where I know most about. It takes your standard recruitment procedures, and but to be successful and make it worth your money, have a proper described job position, make them be meaningful in the company, pay them a proper stipend, and ensure that there is enough support from management in the company to get them successful. I think that's lacking primarily, and that's what we with the Experience Factory offer companies, that we take them through that whole process and offer them that as a solution.
Because what we do find with our high levels of youth unemployment is that once young applicants with potential are given that first or second opportunity, that generally they remain sticky within the labour force. That's certainly what Stats SA and the Statistician General were saying recently when they released their latest household survey and their quarterly labour force survey, is that it's just that first opportunity, that someone opening the door for them, that doesn't seem to be happening. So this sounds to me like a very positive development, though costly though. I mean, a lot of companies may look at that increase from 3 to 6% and question why.
Yes, question why, of course. I'm not going into the debate whether it should be or not be. I think it's a reality. And then you should just make the most out of that 6%.
Sure.
And embrace it. But again, I'm coming back to the point: set yourself up for the future.
Pascal, I'd like to bring you in here because time is running away from us. Now, the fourth category is referred to as ESD, Enterprise and Supplier Development, and really is a fusion of two former categories that we've seen, preferential procurement on the one hand and enterprise development on the other. Let's start with the aspect of enterprise development within the new category. What can a company do to collect points when it comes to enterprise development?
Okay, if I can also just add, there's a new sub-element called supplier development. So what they've done is they've kept the procurement in terms of checking to see whether your businesses are procuring your products and services from BE-compliant companies, and they've split it up in quite a few different classifications, such as EMEs, more than 51% black-owned companies, 30% black female-owned companies. So they've really, boiled down to the nitty-gritty of where you're actually purchasing your products and services from. But what they've done is they've added a new sub-element called supply development, which is very much the same as enterprise development. The only difference, though, is that it's got to be a supplier to your business. So you've got to prove that that supplier has invoiced you for certain products and services. But to get back to your question, how people can gain points there's already 15 points between supply and enterprise development that you can get points where you have to spend 2% of your net profit after tax on supply development and 1% on enterprise development. And whether a company finds somebody who's within their supply chain or outside their supply chain, it will then would clarify whether that beneficiary would fall under the enterprise or supplier development category. But basically what they're trying to do is they're trying to encourage businesses to look for opportunities for small businesses and then eventually purchase from them to become then a supplier to that particular business.
Yeah.
And they can do it in various ways. It doesn't have to be handing out cash all the time. It can be done through training, through mentoring, through preferential procurement terms or payment terms rather, through credit extension. So it doesn't have to just be about handing money out.
And preferential procurement, Ralph, is something that probably isn't an everyday term unless you're in government and governed by things like the preferential procurement framework. And what exactly is meant by preferential procurement in terms of the scorecard?
I think, Michael, that with the preferential procurement, it is, they reached the true meaning, what happened when it turned from BEE to broad-based black empowerment, and also to do away with the myth, that still rules amongst, certain boardrooms there where you don't supply the government, you don't need a BEE certificate. The points that you collect here are for your suppliers when you look at them, the mix of your suppliers and their BEE ratings, and look at the sum of the spendings of that you have as a company with BEE-rated suppliers in ratio to your total spend of the company. But you don't just add up when what your BEE-rated suppliers are and what your non-BEE-rated suppliers are. Each level of BE verification has a percentage for preferential procurement attached. And if you look at it, level 4, which is pretty much in the middle, is equal to 100% recognition, while level 1 goes up to 135%, while level 8, the worst one, only accounts for a rest of 10%. So you can actually multiply the value of your supplies with one supplier by his percentage, attributed to his BE level, and make up for let's say DUD or not rated or unrated companies and suppliers, by having a couple of better rated suppliers in your portfolio.
Well, I want to get to the final question. We said we're going to try and answer whether or not it is still possible for an average company, not a multinational with deep pockets here, to score enough points to still get a decent BE rating and certificate. And I'll throw it to you, Reinoud, to lead off. You've already nodded your head, so you think it is possible?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's a mindset. If you are truly engaged with South Africa and you want the best for South Africa, then you have to embrace the majority, the demographics of South Africa. And the BE is just a vehicle to do that. But don't look at your points, do what's right. and look at your future market and ensure that you're set up to service that market, but also and by servicing that market, you need the people that know that market. So, I think it's a natural way to look at it, and then the points will come from almost itself.
Pascal?
Yeah, I think what I would say to answer your question initially is that yes, you can score a decent score. And just to give you an example, if you're a white-owned business and you have no black ownership, you will have some restrictions in terms of the discounting principle, but the highest level you would possibly get is a level 5, which is, still 80% recognition in terms of your clients. So, as long as you know what to do and how to do it, it is very possible to score a decent score within, the current revised codes.
Ralph?
Yeah, Michael, I think as we have heard, in the case of PE, ignorance is not bliss. And if you plan ahead and put your strong points, in line with your company policies and budgets, and pick a little bit here and there, I agree with Pascal. The best you can, even as a non-black owned company, is surely a level 5 or even a level 6, which gives you enough recognition. So yes, there's absolutely hope.
And unequivocally, this is, as Reinoud said, about the spirit of the legislation and understanding, the operating environment South Africa has passed, and everyone playing their part to not only do the right thing, but also increase the size of future markets and create a bit of that virtuous cycle that can lead us back to growth, which is sorely lacking in the South African economy right now. Thanks to all my guests tonight, Ralph Ertner, CEO of Into Group, Pascal Lagesse, MD of SAB&T Verificators, and Reinoud Willemsen, who's the founding partner of the Experience Factory. Reinoud, I'm going to have you back on the show so we can find out a little bit more about the work you're doing.